US President Joe Biden has signed the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act. Earlier today, the act, also called the Resolve Tibet Act, mandates that Tibet's issue must be resolved in accordance with international law. It also states that the resolution should come through peaceful means and dialogue and without any precondition. Wen Khenpo Sonam Tenfel, a member of the Tibetan parliament in exile, also thanked President Joe Biden and the White House for signing of the Resolve Tibet Act. Just last month, the US House of Representatives passed the Resolve Tibet Act in June. The act aimed to build pressure on China to resume dialogue with Tibetan leaders. The dialogue, which has been stalled since 2010, sought to arrive on a conclusion regarding Tibet's future. Now, after the passing of the act, a group of 7 US lawmakers visited India's Dharamshala to meet the exiled Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama. The visit came as a show of support for the Tibetan cause. The visit did draw criticism, a strong one at that, from Beijing, which has categorized Dalai Lama as a separatist. During this meeting too, China urged Washington to recognize the Dalai Lama's anti-China approach and avoid contact with the leader. Now, what is the Resolve Tibet Act? Let's break it down for you. The act supersedes 2 previous acts, namely the Tibetan Policy Act, or the TPA, of 2002 and the Tibetan Policy and Support Act, or the TPSA, of 2020. The recent act aims at authorizing the use of funds to counter Chinese disinformation about Tibet. This includes disinformation about the history of Tibet, the Tibetan people, and the Tibetan institutions, including that of the Dalai Lama. The act also challenges the Chinese contention that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. The act also urges China to sign 2 things, which are the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It comes as recognition of Tibetan people to self-determination and human rights. Finally, it also amends the 2002 TPA to define the exact geographical areas which are part of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. In fact, China also passed laws over the cause of quote-unquote Taiwan independence. The law addressed punishing the opinions that quote-unquote incited the splitting of China by taking up the Tibetan cause under the secessionist law of the People's Republic of China. The law stated that there is only one China and Taiwan is an inalienable part of the Chinese territory. Now, the acts that Beijing made punishable under its criminal law included initiating the Taiwan independence, attempting to change the legal status of Taiwan as part of China, an attempt to create 2 Chinas, falsifying the fact that Taiwan is part of China, amongst other things like organizing separatist events or dialogues. For more on this, we are now being joined by Greg Swenson, who's joining us from London, and he's live, and he's a US and a China foreign affairs analyst. Greg, what does this act mean for the people of Tibet, and how is China expected to react to it?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't really mean much for the people of Tibet. I mean, it's nice. It's probably more virtue signaling than anything else. It really won't have any effect on relations, and it won't have effect on the people of Tibet, unfortunately. I don't disagree with the content and the intentions, but it's just not going to work. It's completely toothless. And as far as China's concerned, they obviously will reject this. They've already stated that. So I don't see China getting to the negotiation table. They've stated their policy, and it's very clear that they believe Tibet is part of China. I don't see how this act, while sounding very good, I don't see how it affects anything on the ground.
Greg, how is the United States really hoping to resolve this issue?
Again, I think it's well-intentioned, and they've been doing this for 14 years now. But, first of all, Joe Biden is compromised on China, so I don't see him putting any more teeth into this project because he's compromised. His family was receiving payments from the CEPC, and some of that flowed to Joe Biden. I think he's got to be very careful and very delicate. You also have the unfortunate timing of 3 straight years of defense cuts in the United States. President Biden has cut defense spending in real terms, adjusted for inflation, 3% 3 years in a row. That's a 9% cut. That's not something that I would advise when there's tensions in the world, such as with China.
You make a very pertinent point there. Greg, stay with us. We'll come back to you in just a bit. But for now, let's update our viewers on something else. After China's military activity intensified, Taiwan has said that its air defense forces were on high alert. Taiwan's defense ministry said that it had detected multiple waves of test launches by China's rocket force in Inner Mongolia, which lies some 2,000 kilometers from Taiwan. Now, in its annual assessment of security threats, Japan has expressed its worry that any conflict in Taiwan would spread to its territory. Japan's westernmost island is only 110 kilometers from Taiwan. Further, Tokyo has underlined Beijing's plan to double nuclear arsenal to more than 1,000 warheads by 2030. Besides China, Japan also identified Russia and North Korea as concern because of their growing ties and exchange of artillery shells and other ammunitions.
Shaped decades of Russia-North Korea relations. Unconditional support for all.
Of course, big developments from Japan. Japan has warned of rising tension over China's military drills near Taiwan, the one that we just spoke about. And Taiwan is on alert over waves of missile tests in North China. Greg, how do you look at the continuing Chinese hegemony in the sea, its policy of flexing muscle at neighbors?
Yes, they're definitely flexing their muscles. And I'm glad to see Japan has been stepping up over the last couple of years and alerting the world to the tensions in and around the region. And so, there has been some response. You had the AUKUS project with Australia, the UK, and the US. You've had Japan increasing defense spending. So you're seeing some signals from the region. And that's why I hope the US can actually get back to reinforcing the defense budget in these complicated times. I don't see any return from this sort of muscle flexing by Xi and by the CCP, especially given the economic problems they have at home.
Sure. It's interesting that you touched upon the economic problems. Could it in fact be the Chinese policy of raising tensions with the neighbors to deflect actually attention from the domestic economic issues, given that China is skipping quarterly GDP briefing as Xi Jinping holds the party conclave on Monday?
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, look, you've got a major property price depreciation or deflation in China. These numbers, even when they do release the GDP numbers, they're very suspicious. Any growth we saw in the first quarter was driven by manufacturing investment, which was up almost 10%, 9.9. Industrial production up 6.1%. That's really to drive exports, because the consumer is really worried about property prices. That's affecting consumer balance sheets. So they just can't depend on consumption in their country. So they're ramping up exports. They did this in the 2000s, in 2000, 2010, and it worked. But I don't know that it will work now, because you have a different world right now. You're seeing pushback from the West, from other trading partners on Chinese subsidized or government subsidized or state-owned companies that are exporting cheap products. You're seeing pushback on that. So I don't know that this ramp up of industrial production and manufacturing will actually solve the problem. But Xi will use every opportunity to deflect attention away from the property price bubble and the consumer confidence deflation.
Okay, Greg Swenson, thank you so much for joining us with your insights on the broadcast. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.